Well, greetings everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word and another edition for our news, nuggets, and insights. And today is Friday, June 29th, 2018. We are halfway through this year already. Boy, time's just flying by. And this week we have a very special program for you. This week we're going to be selling the July 4th. We're going to be talking about the blessings on America. And we're going to be going back to some of our heritage and let some of the stars of yesteryear give you a little bit about what it is that we are as a nation. Then we're going to talk about some trade wars. We're not going to have a lot of news today because we want to talk more about the July 4th. But there's so much news going on, we couldn't just pass it all up because I want to talk about these trade wars and showing you how they are leading into other things, and you're at the beginning stages of a change of a culture in the middle of it all. And I'm going to bring this together with Amos chapter 8 as we go into the July 4th, Tammuz 17, and Amos chapter 8, bringing it all together today. So let's begin telling our story and remembering our heritage by none other than who else can you use but the Duke. So what we have is I have a video of John Wayne telling us why he loves America. So let's begin with that video right now.
You ask me why I love her? Well, give me time and I'll explain. Have you seen a Kansas sunset or an Arizona rain? Have you drifted on a bayou down Louisiana way? Have you watched the cold fog drifting over San Francisco Bay? Have you heard a Bob White calling in the Carolina pines, or heard the bellow of a diesel in the Appalachia mines? Does the call of the Niagara thrill you when you hear her waters roar? You look with awe and wonder at the Massachusetts shore, where men who braved a hard new world first stepped on Plymouth Rock. Do you think of them when you stroll along a New York City dock? Have you seen a snowflake drifting in the Rockies way up high? Have you seen the sun come blazing down from a bright Nevada sky? You hail to the Columbia as she rushes to the sea, or how you're headed, Gettysburg, our struggle to be free? Have you seen the mighty Tetons? You watched an eagle soar? Have you seen the Mississippi roll along Missouri's shore? Have you felt a chill at Michigan when on a winter's day her waters rage along the shore in thunderous display? Does the word aloha make you warm? Do you stare in disbelief when you see the surf come roaring in at Waimea Reef? From Alaska's cold to the Everglades, from the Rio Grande to Maine, my heart cries out, my pulse runs fast, the might of her domain. You ask me why I love her? I've a million reasons why. My beautiful America, beneath God's wide, wide sky.
What program talking about America and our heritage would be complete without the Duke? You have to wonder, how in the world did we go from John Wayne to Lil Wayne in such a short period of time? All right, now, you remember when you were in school, what was one of the very first things you had to do every morning before you actually did anything in your class? Remember what you had to do? Everybody had to get up, stand up, put your hand over your heart, and do what? Pledge allegiance to the flag. So what we're going to do now, we're going to begin our program the same way, but we're going to let Red Skelton tell you the story about the Pledge of Allegiance. So let's play that little clip right now.
I remember a teacher that I had. Now, I went through the 7th grade. I went to the 7th grade. And I left home when I was 10 years old because I was hungry. And I used to, this is true. I work in the summer and I go to school in the winter. But I had this one teacher. He was the principal of the Harrison School in Vincennes, Indiana. To me, this was the greatest teacher, a real sage of my time, anyhow. He had such wisdom. And we were all reciting the Pledge of Allegiance one day. And he walked over, this little old teacher. Mr. Laswell was his name. Mr. Laswell. He says, he says, I've been listening to you boys and girls recite the Pledge of Allegiance all semester. And it seems as though it's becoming monotonous to you. If I may I recite it and try to explain to you the meaning of each word. I, me, an individual, a committee of one, pledge, dedicate all of my worldly goods to give without self-pity. Allegiance, my love and my devotion to the flag, our standard, Old Glory, a symbol of freedom. Wherever she waves, there's respect, because your loyalty has given her a dignity that shouts freedom is everybody's job. United. That means that we have all come together. States, individual communities that have united into 48 great states. 48 individual communities with pride and dignity and purpose. All divided with imaginary boundaries, yet united to a common purpose. And that's love for country. And to the republic, a state in which sovereign power is invested in representatives chosen by the people to govern. And government is the people. And it's from the people to the leaders, not from the leaders to the people, for which it stands. One nation, meaning so blessed by God, indivisible, incapable of being divided, with liberty, which is freedom, the right of power to live one's own life without threats, fear, or some sort of retaliation. And justice, the principle or qualities of dealing fairly with others. For all, which means, boys and girls, it's as much your country as it is mine. And now, boys and girls, let me hear you recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Since I was a small boy, 2 states have been added to our country, and 2 words have been added to the Pledge of Allegiance: under God. Wouldn't it be a pity if someone said that is a prayer and that would be eliminated from schools too?
Well, it is a pity because they have removed it from school. In fact, they're trying to remove the allegiance and the honor of our nation across the board. As we've witnessed in the last year, how people will not even stand for the national anthem in respect for this nation. And we in God's church need to understand that when we pledge allegiance, that's not worship to someone else. That's respect and loyalty to the nation that God gave us. And as I'm going to show you in the second half of this program, as we tie all this in some of the nuggets, we are Israel. This is a nation blessed above all countries. And we, of all people, God's people, called out of this world to be a part of the warning message for the return of Jesus Christ, need to understand that this nation and why we spend so much time trying to warn and prepare, because we are the nation that God gave to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. A blessing above all blessing. By the way, one last thing Red Skelton used to do for those who may not remember this, and our younger people probably don't because they never even got to see him. At the end of every program, Red Skelton would close his program with, "And may God bless." So I wanted to share that with you today. We got two more stars that we want to tell some stories a little bit later in the program. We're going to come back to that. So now let's move on and let's talk about some issues right now that are affecting this nation. And these issues are going to get worse as time goes on. And they'll get better and they'll get worse because everybody's jockeying for position. And this is about the growing trade war problems that's taking place. So we're going to talk about Trump igniting the trade war. Then we'll talk about the nations retaliating, and then we're going to tie in Hosea chapter 8 to trade wars to show you something in the Bible that maybe you haven't quite put together yet and see if this is what God is showing us right now. So trade wars, we began focusing this way back in April. On June 15th, we brought it up again, and that's why we're following through today. But we were talking about this back as early as April 13th and April 20th. Then last week, or 2 weeks ago, we brought up the trade wars as they were beginning to escalate. All right, trade wars. So what happened recently? On June 16th, the headlines read from the AFP, which is a worldwide network coming out of Europe, Trump ignites trade war with China, triggering swift retaliation. Now, we said that this was going to happen. There is no other way to get around this when you begin trade wars. Now, here's the problem. Let me throw this out right now so people will understand where I'm coming from and where we as a church and where this program is coming from. You can't go fix what's been broken unless it's repented of and changed. Here's my point, is that for decades, these trade imbalances have been going on, and Hosea is going to tell us why, because these nations are bought lovers. So what's happened is they have gotten fat, they have gotten rich, they have lived off the abundance of this nation as we have allowed this to continue, buying off our friends by giving them things. And so we have this trade imbalances that's been going on now for decade after decade after decade. So if we could put it into perspective, it's like a child. So if you have a child that's spoiled and he gets everything he wants anytime he wants, what happens when you begin to finally take away the candy from the baby? You get this huge uproar of crying and retaliation and throwing fits. Well, that's what you're looking at. Only when it's with nations, it can affect people's lives, and it can affect the outcome of economy for decades. So now we are in the beginning of those stages right now. Now, by the way, this is the exact same thing that's going on with the immigration policy. Once you break a law, a principle, a foundation, something that God says it needs to be handled this way. Once it's broken, you pay the consequences. And sometimes it's like that little genie. When you open up that bottle, sometimes you can't get the genie back in the bottle. And so as we move closer and closer to the end time, we're going to find we're going to be the genie just not going to get back in that bottle. But in the meantime, we're going to see an escalation and a settling down as people begin jockeying for positions. So that's what's going on right now. So when I cover these stories, I'm going to bring them to you from a biblical perspective, not from a left and not from a right. Sometimes it's going to feel like that I'm supporting the Trump administration. Sometimes it's going to feel like I'm totally against the administration. And it's amazing that I've gotten calls from people on both sides of the coin saying, why are you against and why are you for? And the point is, I'm not for either. I'm for trying to bring out the biblical principles that God tells us about. So if you can keep that in mind, you'll be able to follow very easily what we're doing and where we're going. All right, so now let's go on with that. With that said, so now let's move on. So this is what happened on June 15th. The U.S. President Donald Trump on Friday, 6/15, said, he ignited his trade war with China, slapping tariffs on tens of billions of Chinese imports, sparking immediate retaliation from Beijing. The moves brought the world's two largest economies to the verge of an all-out confrontation long feared by markets and industry. All right, so now follow me on this chart. So look at the trade imbalance in the exports between the United States in blue and China in red. All right, so there's no way to even come close to being able to balance these things out. Trouble is, it'll never be balanced out. And so as we put tariffs on, what do you think the other nations are going to do? Exactly what we're seeing right now. We have this huge trade imbalances. So just as we've said would happen, is happening. This is from the intelligentsia. This is that China retaliates with new tariffs as Trump's trade war escalates. China has promised officially announced the new retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods on Saturday, claiming that Trump administration had launched a trade war. So now, as we put on $50 billion in tariffs, China turns around and adds $50 billion to their tariffs against the U.S. goods. Then President Trump comes back, so okay, well now we're going to add $200 billion of tariffs. And China says, if you do, then we're going to come back and add $200 billion to your tariffs. So then you begin to see, as what we said would happen, and this is the way it always works when you begin this type of program. So with Friday, Trump, with the imposition of 25% tariffs on some $50 billion worth of Chinese exports. So that's what we're looking at right now. So now, in Canada, of course, you've heard a lot more about Canada because of Trudeau and what they've had recently. This means war, Canada says. Furious Canada and Mexico launch retaliations after Trump imposes the tariffs. This came out on June 22nd. Canada responded to the U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum by imposing billions of dollars worth of countermeasures, while Mexico put duties on food and steel, and EU vowed its own retaliation. So there. All right, so now we're at the beginning of all these stages. And so you can't hardly go back now to fix. The problem is that when these other nations began putting the tariffs at the beginning, that's when the United States should have spoken up. So when you wait decades and decades, and everybody's gotten used to the money differences of the nation, you can't hardly stop it. I don't know how in the world they're going to stop it. Some will settle down and it's going to go on as they need one another. But in the long run, a lot of people are going to be hurt before this is all over. So now, Europe also begins retaliating against the Trump tariffs, June 21st, 28. This is from Sweden. Europe Union fought back on Friday against Trump's administration with the tariffs. The Europe counterattacked with $3.2 billion in goods, slapping penalties on an array of American goods that target the president's political base, like bourbon, motorcycles, and orange juice. So all of this is all going on now, and we're beginning to see an escalation and a problem. You can even understand that these things are going to happen because Luke 21 says it's going to reach a point where there is no resolving the issues. When we get to that stage, there'll be one last final attempt to bring peace, and you can see a man of sin, you see the rise of the Holy Roman Empire, and then you'll see a world governance, not government, but a world governance taking place to be able to try to control the problems that's in the world. I believe we're getting close to the beginning of those stages now. That could take, that could take decades still. Look how long the Cold War went. Look how long it took before they took down the Berlin Wall. So where we're at now, but one thing you can rest assured, you are at the beginning of what's going to be showing that needs to take place before the return of Jesus Christ. So those are the things, and that's why I'm bringing this out today. So now, going on. Just on Monday, with all this taking place, Harley-Davidson began a move to talk about building the manufacturing of many of its motorcycles that's going to Europe, manufacture them in Europe, because they said it's going to cost them probably $100 million because of the price of the tariffs that it was bringing over here into America and then selling them back into Europe. Of course, immediately the Trump administration told them to slow down, think it through, otherwise there's going to be more penalties. So I don't know where that's going to end. But just to show you that even when you add these measures, sometimes the people in the United States are hurt. So I'm not saying pro or against, but what I'm bringing to you is the reality of what's taking place. What is known, though, is that the countries who are beginning these retaliatory practices are picking products. Now, this is political. They're picking products in the states that Donald Trump won in his election. So if one state produced their mainstay of certain things that protected Donald Trump, they put the tariffs in that state. So it's a global effort to try to stop what the administration's doing. And they're pulling no stops. They're pulling no stops. They're not taking any prisoners in this before this is all over. Harley-Davidson said they will move the production of motorcycles bound for European countries out of the United States, citing rising costs for the European Union tariffs on its products. The company said that in a filing on Monday, that's Monday of this week, that the EU tariffs on the motorcycles exported rose from 6% to 31%. So that's a pretty serious increase in cost for their motorcycles. And if they let that go on, of course, then they will begin to lose the trade, especially against BMW, which basically built out of Germany. So you'll begin to see some of these things beginning to escalate when you think this thing all the way through. Now, motorcycles bound for European countries, it said, will now be produced in overseas factories. So that's what we're looking at with Harley-Davidson. But now it gets even greater. Now we're escalating the problem a little bit further. This is from the Associated Press on June 21st. The NATO head said that there is no guarantee that the transatlantic alliance will survive. Now, this came out of London. All right, this is from the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. In London, he says that the bonds between Europe and North America are under strain, and there's no guarantee that the transatlantic partnership will survive, the head of NATO warned on Thursday. NATO Secretary Stoltenberg called for an effort to shore up the military alliance amid the divisions between Europe and the United States and trade and the climate change and the Iran nuclear deal. So they're bringing in everything now, all the things that the administration has been bringing out. They're bringing now, putting them all on the table, saying we need to strengthen our allies, strengthen Europe, the European Union that's going on, and we need to put it all on the table, and we need to begin to protect ourselves and build our own military. This is prophetic. This is prophetic in the Bible when we talk about the nations coming together and the 10 toes and mired with iron and with clay. So we're seeing all these things finally beginning to make some of its move that we in the churches of God have been looking for now for several decades. You're seeing it right before your very eyes. So now, how does this play from Scripture? So I'm going to bring something out to you, and then we're going to ask some questions because some of this has profound significance now to what's going on in the world and some of these trade barriers. And you tell me if it doesn't look like Hosea chapter 8, verses 6 through 9 is talking about the climate that we're moving in today. All right, you ready? Let's go through this. Hosea chapter 8 and verse 6. Far from Israel, even this, a workman made it, and it is not God. So when we look at ancient Israel, I'm going to compare now what God's warning, what He gave us to us from the past, and tie it into today, into the world today, into the United States, into Europe today, looking at it through the eyes of Amos way back in the Old Testament. When God said Israel is even this, a workman made it, and it is not God. What did they make that wasn't God? Well, it was the golden calf. He said, but the calf of Samaria shall be broken into pieces. So now, what are we looking at that's breaking into pieces in the United States? Wall Street. So what are we looking at in the comparison of ancient Israel and today? Is where they look to for leadership. They looked to the golden calf. Remember when Moses was up on the mountain? They thought he died. They said, well, we don't know what happened to this guy. So let's build us a calf, and then we'll go from there. So they built the calf. So now, people who have abandoned their God and are looking at the golden calf. That's not a God. That is the God of this nation now, the money. So what are we looking at with Samaria? Look at 1 Kings chapter 16, 23 and 24. He says, in the 21st year of Asa, king of Judah, Omri became king over Israel and reigned for 12 years. 6 years he reigned in Tisra, and he bought the hill of Samaria and Shemer for 2 talents of silver, and then he built on a hill, and he called the name of the city he built Samaria. So why is God saying this in Amos? Because Samaria became the capital for the northern tribe there at the time. And it was in Samaria, and it stayed there until we see in 2 Kings 17, 5 and 6. Now the king of Assyria went throughout all the land and went up to Samaria and besieged it for 3 years. And in the 9th year of Hosea, the king of Assyria took Samaria and carried away Israel to Assyria. Now this is pretty prophetic and very profound, because the Samaria was like the capital. And who came and took them? Assyria. Who are the modern day Assyrians? Germany. And what we just read just a few minutes ago is that this said we need to take care of ourselves, and we need to build a military. And who's going to build the military might of Europe? Assyria, Germany. And who are they going to take away? And what our capital is, and our fake God in the United States, they're going to destroy the economic system of our nation. I mean, that's what you're looking at here. All right, so that's what you're looking at right now as we're going through. How does it happen? All right, Hosea actually goes on to tell us now how it happens. Verse 7, they sow the wind and they reap the whirlwind. So let me ask you a question. When we sow our tariffs, what are we reaping? The return of the whirlwind from the rest of the world. That's what's going on right now. It's building right in front of your very eyes. But now Hosea, God has put in this even more than just that. All right, so we're beginning to see, now it doesn't have to just be tariffs, don't get me wrong. But what I'm saying is that it is taking place right now. The tariffs are throwing the wind, and we're reaping a whirlwind. That's not the only thing that's going to take place, but it is taking place right now. Toward the end, as we get closer, there'll be more things that's going to happen that's going to fulfill this even further. But we can take from what we see right now, this is being fulfilled right before your very eyes. Now, let's go a little bit further now. The stalk has no bud. Talking about the produce in the nation. It says it shall never produce meal. And if it should produce meal, what happens? The aliens swallow it up. So now, while all this is going on, and we're reaping the wind, and we're receiving the whirlwind, what else is taking place? In our borders, on the southern borders especially, who's just flooding through. 50, 100,000 people a month flooding through, and we're having this war taking place of whether they have borders or no borders and open borders. And so we're looking at the beginning of the fulfillment of the aliens would swallow it up coming through in our nation. Look what verse 8 says now. Israel is swallowed up. So we're beginning to see our nation being swallowed up. They are among the Gentiles because we're seeing these people just filling through. And you can rest assured that when this administration is over and you have a new administration comes in and they want to let no borders, no boundaries, anybody can come in at any time, you will see they will be swallowed up. That's coming, y'all. Why do you think the battle was so furious, so fast on the border just this past week? I'm going to talk about that. That's why I'm bringing this to you today. Why do you think the fury just rose so much? Because what we're looking at, and you need to keep remembering, this is not Republican and it's not Democrat. This is evil. This is a spiritual battle. Because Satan needs to get to the stage. What God's warning in this book of Hosea is that you are going to be swallowed up by the alien. And so you see this anger just rising to this type of fulfillment. Look what it says now. For they have gone up to Assyria. Now who did we reap the whirlwind to? To Europe and to China and to the rest of the world. So they're saying you went up to Assyria like a donkey alone by itself. That sound familiar? Who else is with us in our nations? It says Ephraim has hired lovers. Hired lovers. Now who's back in the United States? Almost nobody out there is back in the United States. In fact, I don't know any other country standing with us right now in what we're trying to do. So now they sow the wind. Trade wars right now. They reap the whirlwind. We see the return of the retaliation of these other countries coming through. The stalk has no bud, so we're going to begin to see our produce being swallowed up and taken over by others and the Gentiles coming in. And so now you have immigration issues. Now, we're going to talk about that next week because you see, all this ties in together. These immigration issues didn't just rise up like this overnight for nothing. There's a reason all this was going in, and there's a warning there, and it's talking about while we got our heads focused on Europe and everything else going on, us by ourselves, Germany is going to rise up. And you're seeing that now with the retaliation of their trade wars back to us. It says like a donkey. You ever see a donkey? It's like he's stupid. A donkey, you gotta kick him, you gotta pull him, you gotta drag him. It says it's just like the United States now is going against the Germans, against Assyria, like a donkey. Like you're not thinking this through. By ourselves, in our hired lovers, as you'd see in the very last sentence there, Ephraim has hired lovers. That's meaning you can't count on them. All those other countries, they've lived off the fat of the land. When it gets down tough, they're gone. You're going to be out there by yourselves. So then we began to see the trade war, the transatlantic problems that's beginning to take place right now. This is all going on right now. And this is why we're bringing this out and been warning everybody now for the last year and a half. Trade wars, look at Hosea chapter 8 and verse 9. Look at Trump's first policy has isolated the U.S. from the rest of the world. Didn't Hosea just said, you going alone? Well, the United States is being isolated. So Trump has positioned himself at home, alone, and abroad as the disruptor in chief. Now, this is coming from a news agency who doesn't like him. So take it with a grain of salt the way it's written. But in essence, that's exactly what's happening. All right. As a result, in the U.S., he's standing alone on trade wars. And we're seeing the rebellion comes when we stop buying off our lovers. And that's what's taking place. You're in the middle of right now. So now what I'm going to say next week, we're going to talk about immigration. We'll follow through on chapter 8 because like this story. I mean, by the time you hear this program, you probably know about this picture. That little girl there helped start off this whole furor of immigration, being separated from her mother, and the whole thing was a lie. It never happened. The dad said she was never separated. The little girl was tired, she was late, she was thirsty, and she was crying. That's all it was. Earlier this year, we talked about the beginning of the development of the herd mentality. Remember in Florida, how the children, how they began to ramrod the children together into a herd mentality. So in the middle of all this, in the middle of the trade wars, you're beginning to see the change of this trade wars, the herd mentality, and as Hosea was saying, is that next week we're going to go in from herd mentality to stampede, because that's where we're at right now. Is when you can herd them all up, and now you're going to stampede them. So what we've seen in the last week to week and a half is a stampede of all those people. They've been herding up, setting the mindset and putting them in place. And they're talking about the Trump administration being Nazism. Well, I'm going to tell you something. Exactly what's going on the other side. They're pointing the finger. That's exactly how it began in Germany. What they're blaming this administration is what they're doing. So I wanted to bring that out. We need a lot more time to talk about that, but we will talk about that beginning next week. All right. Now let's get back into some good stuff. All right, so now when we come back, I'm going to talk about the biblical nuggets for July 4th and Tammuz 17, which we introduced last week. But right now, this is a fairly long video, but it's telling the story, and I wanted you to hear this story. So if you got the children there, put this on pause, go get your children, come back, and let them hear this story of the Star-Spangled Banner, and we'll be back in about 11 minutes. All right, let's play that video.
There was a lawyer once. His name was Francis Scott Key. He penned a song that I'm sure you're aware of. You've seen it. It's in most hymnals throughout our churches. It's called the National Anthem. It is our song as an American. We go, however, to a ball game. We stand in our church services and we sing the words of that song, and they float over our minds and our lips, and we don't even realize what we're singing. Most of us have memorized it as a child, but we've never really thought about what it means. Let me tell you a story. Francis Scott Key was a lawyer in Baltimore. The colonies were engaged in vicious conflict with the mother country, Britain. Because of this conflict and the protractedness of it, they had accumulated prisoners on both sides. The American colonies had prisoners and the British had prisoners. And the American government initiated a move. They went to the British and they said, let us negotiate for the release of these prisoners. They said, we want to send a man out to discuss this with you. They were holding the American prisoners in boats about 1,000 yards offshore. And they said, we want to send a man by the name of Francis Scott Key. He will come out and negotiate to see if we can make a mutual exchange. On the appointed day, in a rowboat, he went out to this boat and he negotiated with the British officials. And they reached a conclusion that men could be exchanged on a one-for-one basis. Francis Scott Key, jubilant with the fact that he'd been successful, went down below in the boats, and what he found was a cargo hold full of humanity, men. And he said, men, I've got news for you tonight. You're free. He said, tonight I have negotiated successfully your return to the colonies. He said, you'll be taken out of this boat, out of this filth, out of your chains. As he went back up on board to arrange for their passage to the shore, the admiral came and he said, we have a slight problem. He said, we will still honor our commitment to release these men, but it'll be merely academic after tonight. It won't matter. And Francis Scott Key said, what do you mean? He said, well, Mr. Key, he said, tonight we have laid an ultimatum upon the colonies. Your people will either capitulate and lay down the colors of that flag that you think so much of, or you see that fort right over there, Fort Henry? He said, we're going to remove it from the face of the earth. He said, how are you going to do that? He said, if you will, scan the horizon of the sea. And as he looked, he could see hundreds of little dots. And he said, that's the entire British war fleet. He said, all of the gunpowder, all of the armament is being called upon to demolish that fort. It will be here within striking distance in a matter of about 2.5 hours. He said, the war is over. These men would be free anyway. He said, you can't shell that fort. He said, that's a large fort. He said, it's full of women and children. He says, it's predominantly not a military fort. He said, don't worry about it. They said, we've left them a way out. And he said, what's that? He said, do you see that flag way up on the rampart? He said, we have told them that if they will lower that flag, the shelling will stop immediately. And we'll know that they've surrendered, and you'll now be under British rule. Francis Scott Key went down below and told the men what was about to happen. And they said, how many ships? He said, hundreds. The ships got closer. Francis Scott Key went back up on top and he said, men, I'll shout down to you what's going on as we watch. As twilight began to fall, and as the haze hung over the ocean as it does at sunset, suddenly the British war fleet unleashed. He says the sound was deafening. There were so many guns that there were no reliefs. He said it was absolutely impossible to talk or hear. He said suddenly the sky, although dark, was suddenly lit. And he says from down below, all he could hear the men, the prisoners, saying was, tell us where the flag is. What have they done with the flag? Is the flag still flying over the rampart? Tell us. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours into the shelling. Every time the bomb would explode and it would be close to the flag, they could see the flag in the illuminated red glare of that bomb. And Francis Scott Key would report down to the men below, it's still up. It's not down. The admiral came and he said, your people are insane. He said, what's the matter with them? He said, don't they understand this is an impossible situation? Francis Scott Key said he remembered what George Washington had said. He said the thing that sets the American Christian apart from all other people in the world is he will die on his feet before he'll live on his knees. The admiral said, we have now instructed all of the guns to focus on the rampart to take that flag down. He said, we don't understand something. Our reconnaissance tells us that that flag has been hit directly again and again and again, and yet it's still flying. We don't understand that. But he said, now we're about to bring every gun for the next 3 hours to bear on that point. Francis Scott Key said the barrage was unmerciful. All that he could hear was the men down below praying. The prayer, God, keep that flag flying where we last saw it. Sunrise came. He said there was a heavy mist hanging over the land, but the rampart was tall enough. There stood the flag, completely nondescript, in shreds. The flagpole itself was at a crazy angle, but the flag was still at the top. Francis Scott Key went aboard and immediately went into Fort Henry to see what had happened. And what he'd found had happened was that that flagpole and that flag had suffered repetitious direct hits. And when it had fallen, but men, fathers, who knew what it meant for that flag to be on the ground, although knowing that all of the British guns were trained on it, walked over and held it up humanly until they died. Their bodies were removed and others took their place. Francis Scott Key said what held that flagpole in place at that unusual angle were patriots' bodies. He penned the song, "Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming? Or the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that the flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet fly and wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?" The debt was demanded. The price, it was paid.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets sprayed clear, the bombs bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet
What a powerful piece. I thought instead of just playing the music, let's tell the story. That's about 11 and a half minutes long. It would be a nice piece if you need a sermonette for church to give an understanding of the people who fought and died for this nation and what our flag represents. It reminded me so much of the Bible as God's patriots who fought and died for the truth of God. And that's where we're going to move into now in the second portion of our program. Welcome back. All right, so now let's talk about the biblical nuggets. Last week we introduced in our 100th edition of the God's Unchanging Word program, July 4th and Tammuz 17. So what I'm going to do today is just I'm going to give you the brief connection point. But in a sermon I'm going to give on Saturday this week, I'm going to begin talking about this connection, and I'm going to get into the biblical significance of how all this takes place of Tammuz 17. So now, in the 100th program, we introduced last week the Roman calendar of June 22nd, 2018. That was our 100th program. It was just coincidental that on God's calendar, it fell on Tammuz 9. All right, Tammuz 9. So now we're talking about Tammuz 17. And what's Tammuz 9? So before I tell you, let me go a little further. Then we brought in the breaching of the walls in Jerusalem in 586 BC. And on God's calendar, that was Tammuz 9. So it was a very significant time of warning in the breaching of the walls into God's people. Then June 26, 2015 was also on Tammuz 9. And we asked the question, what happened on June 26, 2015? Again, a breaching of God's laws in removal of the marriage between a man and woman and just marriage for gay marriage and separating man and the ordinance that God established from creation. The final breach of the wall between man and God. Satan has finally gotten his way in the nation. So now when you look at the calendar, let's show the Tammuz 9 and Tammuz 17. On June 26, 2015, that was Tammuz 9. On July 4th of the same year, it was so coincidental, or was it? Was this orchestrated by God and Satan brought about in this particular way to bring about the evil? It was Tammuz 17. What do these two dates have in common? 586 BC was the breaching of the wall by Babylon and the fall of the ancient city in Jerusalem in 586 BC. In 70 AD, the new temple and the walls were breached on Tammuz 17. All right, so it was the breaching of the walls on these two particular dates. Both temples eventually totally were removed on the 9th of Av. The 9th of Av, from the Tammuz 9 and 17 all the way to the 9th of Av, are days of fasting and prayer and the days of mourning for the Jews even of this day. So now, July 4th, 1776 is also Tammuz 17, which we're going to talk about in this connection point. So now, why are all these things so important? It's because our nation was established by God to fulfill the promises in the Old Testament. The blessings given to Jacob and to his progenitors. In Genesis 32, God says this, and he said, let me go, talking about Jacob who had been wrestling with God all night. And he says, let me go for the day breaks. And he says, I will not let you go except you bless me. And he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. He said, your name shall be no more called Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince you have power with God and with men, and you have prevailed. So we're looking at our ancestry, his name, God's changing from Jacob to Israel, and that name is going to be carried through is until this very day. Israel's name, Genesis chapter 48. I'm going through this quick. I just want to bring about where we come from as a church and why we believe today that the United States is Israel, a modern day Israel. In Israel, this is Genesis 48, verse 16. The angel which redeemed me from all evil blessed the lads. All right, this is talking about Jacob. He says, and let my name, what was the name that God gave him just a few chapters earlier? Israel. He says, let my name be on them. Who is he speaking to? He's speaking to his grandchildren through Joseph, who were born in Egypt. These two lads, God says, these two men will carry the name of Israel on them. And when we look through history and you see the promises of the blessings, there's only two nations on the face of this earth fulfill the promises given by God in Genesis, and that is the United States and Great Britain. All right, so those two nations would carry the name Israel on them. It says, in the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them be grown to a multitude in the midst of the earth. So here we have, and this is the incredible thing, is the United States, and you can check it out or you could try to disprove it, that we believe that the United States, from everything we have proven for the decades now, show that we fulfill the promises of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So in other words, we carry the name that was given to them, Israel. Jacob's blessings to the tribes, you can read it in Genesis chapter 49. Check it out for yourself. Don't take my word. Read Genesis 49 and you'll see all the blessings. Israel. Now look at 2 Samuel chapter 7 verse 10. People believe today that all of Israel is over there in the Middle East, in that particular land. But I want to bring your attention to one verse. All right, this is a very important verse. This is God talking to King David. This is King David, and as you know, King David was in the Promised Land. You know, he built Israel. He built a nation there. You know, and in fact, he was gathering to build the temple for God that his son would build. Verse 10, he says, moreover, I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and I will plant them. Well, what are you talking about? I mean, they're already in the Promised Land, aren't they? This is more than just, this is a duality here. This is not just the kingdom of God coming. This is talking about the time when they would be driven into exile. They would become the lost 10 tribes, but God would still maintain the nations, and he would fulfill his promise as he drove them to a new place and plant them. If they were already in the Promised Land, the new place to be planted couldn't be the Promised Land because he's going to bring them somewhere else, he said. And when you look at Genesis 49, you'll see there's no other promises could be done except for Great Britain and the United States. He says, and they will move no more, and neither shall the children of wickedness afflict them any more as before time. So you have the former and you have a latter promise talking about the kingdom of God coming, and eventually they'll never be afflicted again. So now, I go into a lot of detail. You can go online. And I did this in a sermon just 2 years ago. It's called God's Providence, 1776, The Rebirth of Israel. And they're both available. It's a 2-part sermon available online. So now, let's talk about today. Why July 2nd? Right? Actually, the Declaration of Independence was penned on July 2nd. But we see July 4th, 1776. The actual birth date of the American Republic was July 2nd, 1776, when the delegates of the Continental Congress meeting in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia approved the resolution introduced on June 7th by Richard Henry Lee of Virginia calling for the independence from Great Britain. So then it was given to Thomas Jefferson. For 3 weeks he worked on the document. So that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. They agreed to that on July 2nd. Says 2 days later, the body adopted a more well-known Declaration of the Independence, which is justified by the decree declaring that the causes which impel them to the separation. So we see that they agreed to it on July 2nd. But when you look at the final outcome, you see it was July 4th. The declaration or the final approval took place 2 days later. So look what happens here. This is John Adams. It says that 2 days after they voted, John Adams wrote to his wife Abigail, declaring that the 2nd day of July will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America. So when they voted on it, they thought that that's going to be the day. But you see, God had another plan. the second is not going to be the day that God wanted this to go, because see, when the United States started, July 4th, 1776, it also fell on the day in the Hebrew calendar, Tammuz 17. So what God did is, while he began to remove the curses of Israel in the 2,520 years, and I go through all of that in the sermon, I'll talk about it again tomorrow, is that he began to bring them a warning at the same time. So it took 2 days, they fine-tuned everything, and it became known that on that particular day, all right, on July 4th, 1776, Tammuz 17, God fulfilled a warning for the foundation of our nation. Going on, he says this, and I am apt to believe it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary and festival, he said. This is July 2nd. He said it ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade and shows and games and sports and guns and bells and bonfires, illuminations. He says, from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forevermore. Well, we do. But we do it on the day that God chose, July 4th, a warning day of Tammuz 17. Our destiny. Look what George Washington says. I'm bringing this in now because our destiny, and talking about the warning, talking about all the problems they're going through and the transformation as a nation. George Washington said, individuals entering into society must give up a share of liberty to preserve the rest. It is at all times difficult to draw with precision the line between the rights which we must be surrendered and those which may be reserved. So what he was saying, that if we're going to form this nation, we got to give up certain rights. And it reminded me of something that Paul wrote way back in the New Testament. 1 Corinthians 7, he said, for he that is called in the Lord, being a servant, is the Lord's free man. Likewise is he also that is called, being free, is Christ's servant. So in other words, as you and I are called into the body of Christ, we give up our freedoms to become slaves to Christ. It's just like in this nation, as we saw in the Star-Spangled Banner and the story you just read, people gave up their lives to become part of something bigger than themselves. All right, so now, let's begin to wrap it up. We've got 2 more videos. Again, a little bit of length. We'll probably run maybe 15 minutes longer than we normally do. We've been an hour, 15 minutes. But I want to bring these 2 out. It's just 2 videos, and we begin wrapping the program up right now. So now we're going to have the story of the signers of the Declaration of Independence by Paul Harvey. So if we're ready, let's play that now, and then I'll be back in just a few minutes.
Americans, the how and the why of our beloved republic are so much better known and understood than the who. The United States of America was born in 1776, but it was conceived 169 years before that. The earliest settlers had watered the New World with much sweat. They had built substantial holdings for themselves, for their families. And when the time came to separate themselves from a tyranny an ocean away, at best it meant starting all over again after the ravages of war. Researching what you're about to hear gave a whole new dimension to my reverence for our nation's first citizens. All others of the world's revolutions, before and since, were initiated by men who had nothing to lose. Nothing to lose. Our founders had everything to lose and nothing to gain, except one thing. But for any eve of the 4th of July, I, Paul Harvey, do herewith bequeath unto you something to remember. You may not be able to quote one line from the Declaration of Independence at this moment. Henceforth, you'll always be able to quote at least one line. It's in the last paragraph where you will recall when I remind you. It says, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. In the Pennsylvania State House that's now called Independence Hall in Philadelphia, the best men from each of the colonies sat down together. This was a very fortunate hour in our nation's history, one of those rare occasions in the lives of men when we had greatness to spare. These were men of means, well-educated. 24 were lawyers and jurists. 9 were farmers, owners of large plantations. On June 11, a committee sat down to draw up a Declaration of Independence. We were going to tell the British fatherland no more rule by redcoats. Below the dam of ruthless foreign rule, the stream of freedom was running shallow and muddy. And we were going to light a fuse to dynamite that dam. This pact, as Burke later put it, was a partnership between the living and the dead and the yet unborn. There was no bigotry, there was no demagoguery in this group. All had shared hardships. Jefferson finished a draft of the document in 17 days. Congress adopted it in July, and so much is familiar history. But now, King George III had denounced all rebels in America as traitors. Punishment for treason was hanging. The names now so familiar to you from the several signatures on that Declaration of Independence, the names were kept secret for 6 months, for each knew the full meaning of that magnificent last paragraph in which his signature pledged his life, his fortune, and his sacred honor. 56 men placed their names beneath that pledge. 56 men knew when they signed that they were risking everything. They knew if they won this fight, the best they could expect would be years of hardship in a struggling nation. And if they lost, they'd face a hangman's rope. But they signed the pledge. And here is the documented fate of that gallant 56. Carter Braxton of Virginia, wealthy planter, trader, saw his ships swept from the seas. To pay his debts, he lost his home and all of his properties and died in rags. Thomas Lynch Jr., who signed that pledge, was a third-generation rice grower, aristocrat, large plantation owner. After he signed, his health failed. His wife and he set out for France to regain his failing health. Their ship never got to France, was never heard from again. Thomas McKean of Delaware was so harassed by the enemy that he was forced to move his family 5 times in 5 months. He served in Congress without pay, his family in poverty and in hiding. Vandals looted the properties of Ellery and Clymer and Hall and Gwinnett and Walton and Hayward and Rutledge and Middleton. Thomas Nelson Jr. of Virginia raised $2 million on his own signature to provision our allies, the French fleet. After the war, he personally paid back the loans, wiped out his entire estate, and he was never reimbursed by his government. In the final battle for Yorktown, he, Nelson, urged General Washington to fire on his, Nelson's, own home, which was occupied by Cornwallis. It was destroyed. Thomas Nelson Jr. had pledged his life, his fortune, and his sacred honor. The Hessians seized the home of Francis Hopkinson of New Jersey. Francis Lewis had his home and everything destroyed, his wife imprisoned. She died within a few months. Richard Stockton, who signed that declaration, was captured, mistreated, his health broken to the extent that he died at 51. His estate was pillaged. Thomas Hayward Jr. was captured when Charleston fell. John Hart was driven from his wife's bedside while she was dying. Their 13 children fled in all directions for their lives. His fields and grist mill were laid waste. For more than a year, he lived in forests and caves and returned home after the war to find his wife dead, his children gone, his properties gone, and he died a few weeks later of exhaustion and a broken heart. Lewis Morris saw his land destroyed, his family scattered. Philip Livingston died within a few months from the hardships of the war. John Hancock, history remembers best due to a quirk of fate rather than anything he stood for. That great sweeping signature attesting to his vanity towers over the others. One of the wealthiest men in New England. And yet he stood outside Boston one terrible night of the war. And he said, "Burn Boston, though it makes John Hancock a beggar, if the public good requires it." So he too lived up to the pledge. Of the 56, few were long to survive. 5 were captured by the British and tortured before they died. 12 had their homes from Rhode Island to Charleston sacked, looted, occupied by the enemy, or burned. 2 lost their sons in the army. 1 had 2 sons captured. 9 of the 56 died in the war from its hardships or from its more merciful bullets. I don't know what impression you had of the men who met that summer in Philadelphia. But I think it's important that we remember this about them. They were not poor men. They were not wild-eyed pirates. These were men of means. They were rich men, most of them, and had enjoyed much ease and luxury in their personal living. Not hungry men, certainly not terrorists, not irresponsible malcontents, not fanatical incendiaries. These men were prosperous men, wealthy landowners. They were substantially secure in their prosperity. They had everything to lose. But they considered liberty, and this is as much as I shall say of it. They had learned that liberty is so much more important than security, that they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And they fulfilled their pledge. They paid the price, and freedom was born.
These stories need to be told every year. They need to be given to our children, and grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The stories of God's blessings to this nation and the men who fought and died, and women who fought and died, to preserve this nation. In conclusion, I just read one part of the conclusion of this document that became so powerful, the Declaration of Independence. It says, "We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world." They took their document and they wrote it and they signed it when pledged with their lives, but they presented it to God Almighty for Him to bless that document. They appealed to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, just like we do every week, right here on God's Unchanging Word. Before we begin every program, we ask God if we would use the words from this document, the Supreme Judge of the world, to help guide our program every week, that we bring Him glory and honor, and that the work we present that being brought about is the truth for the freedom that we fight for to preserve for the soon coming Jesus Christ to this world. And so we do that every single week as we go through. And I'm going to put this up so that you can freeze frame it and go back and you can read it. But these are the concluding paragraphs of that document of the Declaration of Independence. Tomorrow, the sermon I'm going to be giving is called God's Jump-Off Point. It's called at the corner of July 4th and Tammuz 17. And I'm going to be bringing you some interesting information that you probably haven't thought about in the sermon in the Declaration of Independence. Okay, now let's wrap it up. June 29th, this program. In the mail this week, we already put in the mail Jonah, the strangest little book in the Bible. And we also, Jeff got really busy really fast last week, and he went ahead and got the program, our 100th God's Unchanging Word program, and it's in the mail. It's gone already in a matter of days. So if you haven't written for it yet, by all means, let us know, write in, call in, just order it online so we can get you the 100th program. It's a 90-minute special, and it's filled with the history of what we did and why we did with God's Unchanging Word to bring us to this stage. Okay, also in the mail this week was the Quarterly, the magazine talking about the Feast of Tabernacles, and focused around July 4th, and we'll be offering the sermon that I'm giving tomorrow, the God's Jump-Off Point. So that's going in the mail. By the way, if you're not on the mailing list, write in and get on the mailing list so we can get you all this information every single week. Okay, that's it. There you have it for this week. I've got a special little graphic here, but when I bring you in this last video, God Bless America. Okay, this is the first time that it's ever going to be sung. All right, for some reason I can't get it to seem to work here. Let's see here. Oh, I had a great little graphic, and maybe we can pull it in a little bit later. Let me try it one more time. All right, so now let's see if it'll work. Here we go. Now it's working. All right. God bless America. And I wanted to bring it because Ralph brought in his family and friends for the beach. So there he goes one more time. All right. Let's not forget the shark. So you see Fido now, he brought in all his friends and they're out on the 4th celebrating it. So all that work went into that video graphic. I had to make sure we at least tried to use it. So anyway, the last song is God Bless America. This time it's the first time it was ever sung and introduced to the American public. And this is going to be sung by none other than Kate Smith. That'll be our last song, and I'll be right back to say goodbye.
Of our program, Miss Kate Smith.
Hello, everybody. It is my happy privilege to introduce a new song, God Bless America. While the storm clouds gather far across the sea, let us swear allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair, as we raise our voices in a solemn prayer. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountain to the prairie to the ocean, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountain to the prairie to the ocean.
Bye, Daddy.
Bye, Dad. Don't be late.
No?
White with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet
Right, Pop?
Right, son.
God bless America, land that I love. Beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountain to the prairie to the ocean, white with foam. God bless America.
Kind of makes you think of Blake, doesn't it? Makes you think of a lot of things. We're going to be in this yet, Mom.
Hello, son.
Hi, Mom. Hello, darling.
New song?
Brand new, first time in the air.
Brand new, my eye. You know, I threw that song out of Yip Yip Yap Yank 22 years ago. Sounds better now.
That was delivered on Armistice Day, 1938, as the United States was contemplating whether they would get into the war or not, as Germany began to ravage across Europe. Well, that's it for our program. Thanks for watching it. From all of us here at God's Unchanged Word, thanks again. Have a great week. And as Red Skelton says, and may God bless. Till next week, God be with you. From all of us here at God's Unchanged Word, news, nuggets, and insights.